AJ the Cinephile here, and today we are going to be doing my first official deep dive movie review on this channel. I'm super excited to be able to be talking about Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. This film is by Jane Schoenbrunn, and if you are unfamiliar with their work, they've done films such as We're All Going to the World's Fair and I Saw the TV Glow. I personally connected more with I Saw the TV Glow, but I would love to revisit We're All Going to the World's Fair, especially now having a deeper understanding of Jane's work and the fact that they represent parts of their queer exploration journey in each film. And Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma is no exception to how beautiful and otherworldly Jane has been able to create these films and show them on screen. Now, Jane has a very specific and excellent way of writing out real-world scenarios that can often be deemed as taboo or dark in nature, and they do it in such a way that conveys them in like a dreamlike manner and a surreal aura that surrounds their work, and it leaves you feeling seen and heard whenever you are finished watching the films. And that is something that I really love about Jane's work. So if you are familiar with either of those films, you will have a better expectation when going to see Camp Miasma. This film follows Chris, who is played by Hannah Einbinder, and Chris is a young director tasked with rebooting a dying horror franchise surrounding the fictional Camp Miasma. She travels to the iconic filming location of an abandoned summer camp in order to have a meeting with the original film star Billy, played by Gillian Anderson. And Hannah Einbinder used Jane Schoenbrunn as inspiration for her character, and once you see this film, I feel like that will be pretty obvious. Now, upon arrival, Chris finds herself a little uneasy and unsure of what is to come. Chris is one with her work, and while trying to uncover the mystery surrounding the reclusive actress in hopes of getting her to star in the reboot, Billy in turn helps Chris find herself in a very meaningful way. So while watching the story unfold, you are faced to unpack your deepest desires and sexual repression, as well as shame that is often paired with those feelings. And to some, that might seem frightening, and that is exactly the point with the messaging within this film. This isn't going to be a traditional horror movie in any sense of the word. It is more so a modern take of the horror genre and what it does to one's psyche, as well as the exploration that comes with the sexual desires. This film aids the viewer to see their sexual desires as something to be explored and celebrated. Chris and Billy do this in such a way that provides a deep meaning in the word consent. And I find this to be a good time to explore these things, especially with the conversation around Gen Z and them having problems with, like no sex scenes in film, and that being kind of like an epidemic, as well as conservatism that is an ongoing problem within our society. The villain in this film is played by Jack Haven, and they are also a non-binary, discovering themselves as trans person. And so being able to portray those types of stereotypes in a film like this has really that meta factor within it, and that's something that this film heavily relies upon. And Jack Haven also, I want to point out, to my understanding, wears a 60-pound film rig in a continuous shot, and they've spoken about playing a trans villain and how much that means to them. So I think that, whenever you're able to incorporate people who have experienced these things firsthand and then have them portray those characters on film, I think it can be deeply cathartic for them, as well as, the people that go to view this film and seeing all of the depth that goes into making the characters and showing it on screen. Jack Haven plays the character Little Death, which is the villain. And if you are unfamiliar with Jack Haven, they are pretty small. And so for them to be able to wear a 60-pound film rig in a continuous shot, and I know that from clips that I have seen, they've talked about how uncomfortable the headpiece was for them to wear for the costume of the villain. So for them to be able to wear that costume piece, the film rig that weighs about 60 pounds, and do all of this while still being able to act their butt off was pretty incredible to see. I loved that shot. It was very beautifully done. Another factor that made this film a huge home run for me was all of the comedy elements that were sprinkled in throughout. And I feel like in recent times, we've seen directors such as Jordan Peele and Zach Cregger, who have got their start in comedy, have been able to produce some really great horror films. And of course, that is subjective. I personally love both of their work. So if you have a deep understanding of the comedic timing, I feel like that can also help aid you in creating a really good horror film, because you are able to connect with the audience a bit more and the deep impact that that can have. Layering horror, comedy, nostalgia, and the meta factor, which plays a huge role in teenage sex and death at Camp Miasma. This landed the film a 5-star rating for me personally, and just being able to see all of the elements that went into it and the time, the details spent. There is a personal connection that I made, which is whenever Chris is watching the original Camp Miasma on her CRT TV whenever she's a child, and how much that parallels my experience with watching Scream in 1996 as a child. I was definitely way too young to be watching that. I was about 5 years old, and how like you can go from being so scared of something and not being able to like really turn away from it, and how that will sit with you. And then as you evolve, grow up, and change, those feelings can often turn into something that is more sexual in nature, and how that is like kind of something that happens to a lot of people who love the horror genre. I love how much went into creating the world that we see, from the casting to the wardrobe to the soundtrack and the hand-painted sets. And if you haven't seen any of the behind-the-scenes stuff from this, my For You page and my Instagram page is just like full of these things. So it's been really cool to see how much work and effort went into creating this. Also, I want to note that Eva Victor had a small role in this, and I found that to be very delightful, because Eva Victor is the director for Sorry Baby, and that came out last year. It's a very excellent film. I really enjoyed it, and they are a non-binary filmmaker. Having their hair and makeup done so well, I had absolutely no idea while watching it that it was Eva. And so to see all of the queer representation in the casting, that really makes it a special film whenever you are talking about a topic such as queer exploration. Let's talk a little bit about the clothing. There was a shop that the cast and crew were able to go to while choosing the clothing items for the cast. And it was really cool because they actually include 1970s and 1980s vintage clothing, and having those added details really helps, you know, put you in that world, and it makes it more real. If they weren't able to use the actual archive clothing, they used replicas of those, and that is because, you know, as you're filming, things are going to get dirty or messy or bloody for whatever reason that while you're shooting. The fact that they were able to actually, you know, mock up designs that are so spot on to that era and pay tribute to those things, it really helps whenever you are paying attention to those details and world building. Something else to mention is how important the soundtracks are to a film. The song that plays whenever the credits start to roll, that song stuck with me, and I'm still singing it to this day, almost a week later. I also included that with my review that I posted on Instagram. So I think that, you know, paying attention to all of these details and breaking down why it's important, it really makes a big difference, and it sticks with the person after they watch it. So it adds like an element to where they associate the song with the film, and it really creates that vibe that you're looking to convey. Something that really stuck out to me was the hand-painted sets that they used. And as somebody who did hand-painted sets in high school for my theater, I know how much time and effort goes into creating these things. And so to see them on screen was really beautiful. Seeing that they used hand-painted sets in this really just like adds another layer and touches my heart. And I love that they were able to use like a real artist to help build these scenes. They filmed these things on seemingly warm, sunny days, and they used like a lot of sunlight coverage, and then the hand-painted sets were used in framing the shot. So I think that those added details just really help boost the surreal and dreamlike vibe that it needs to be conveyed in this film versus something like a CGI or, you know, an AI generated set, the difference that those things can have on a film. There's also a scene inside of Little Death's video store where there is a flesh wall, and to me that gave immediate Cronenberg meets like Society 1980s horror movie tribute vibes. I looked more into it, and they actually used the same soundstage for Backrooms production that is located in Vancouver. It was a combination of like visual effects as well as a physical wall. They did like a 3D mock-up where they were able to design exactly kind of what they wanted to see, but then they also used foam to actually enhance the wall. So it was like a combination of a physical wall and the animated like 3D effects, which I thought was very interesting and something to take note of. The set designers really wanted this to feel very like as real as possible for everyone involved in the production. So they wanted, you know, drawers to open and for everything to seem as if it was tangible and usable. And I really think that that makes a difference for everyone involved whenever they are getting into the mindset of, you know, hey, this is a world that is real and we can all touch it, feel it. I feel like it really aids them into being immersed in what they are creating. And I think that it makes a huge difference in the end result. Now, we couldn't talk about all of these things without also including how much candy and food is shown in this film. Candy and food is something that we also relate to whenever we think about like a moviegoer's experience. And there are shots of, you know, them dipping the chicken into the sauce, but also the indulgence that comes with food and the mirroring between that and sexual desire. I think that that also adds like a layer of the comedy aspect. The fact that they did a candy chandelier was hilarious. My partner and I were cracking up at that. There's also the gas station, and you know, we see ties back to X and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In a lot of horror films, a gas station is kind of like a very prevalent location that is used in the making of those stories. And so that also ties it back into the meta factor. We also see nods to other films that have made their impact in cinema, such as Mulholland Drive and Friday the 13th. Those were the two standouts for me. And I find it beautiful whenever filmmakers are able to pay respects to other filmmakers and what they've been able to do within cinema, but they do it in such a way where it is more so a callback and not a direct copy of those things. And I think that because those films have such a deep embedded stake within cinema, there's no denying that that's what Jane is referencing here. Now, this film, like I said, truly stuck with me. It feels like you're waking up from a dream where you remember it in such vivid detail versus like a dream where you wake up and you really can't remember what happened. I would love to give you an example. So if you have seen Her Private Hell or have seen people talk about that film, you can have the fashion and the soundtrack and the visuals, but without a story like that is very comprehensible. I feel like it leaves the viewer like feeling like they've been robbed or cheated out of a great movie experience. And all of these details that make up Camp Miasma, you can tell that they were there for very intentional reasoning. You know that the writer and the director had a very clear vision, and they weren't just like constantly rewriting things as they were going. They weren't trying to set out to just make something that looks cool. They have a deeper meaning behind every single choice that was created in the production of Camp Miasma. And I think that that really is shown whenever you are able to see movies like that within the same month, and the difference between somebody who has a clear vision versus somebody who just kind of wants to make something that looks cool. Now, I rarely go back to the cinema for round two just due to lack of time, but also wanting to be able to see new things to review for not only like my Letterboxd or my Instagram, but now for YouTube. And I really just don't think that I'm going to be able to help myself. I have been thinking about this film nonstop, and just after breaking down each segment and everything that was included, all of the details and the messaging, I really just like would love to see it again. If you love other movies that I've mentioned or talked about on my Instagram or on my Letterboxd, I have no doubt that you will also enjoy Camp Miasma. And like I said, I gave it 5 stars. I think it is fully valid and worthy of that rating. So what do you think? Have you seen Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma? If so, I would love to talk to you more in the comments about these things and see if we had a similar understanding of what was happening in this film. Maybe you saw something that I didn't see or that I didn't mention in this video. And as always, I appreciate you listening to me ramble about film. It is a passion of mine. If you would like to see real-time ratings and reviews for things, you can always follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram at AJ the Cinephile. I have plans to move forward with this channel. I finally figured out my setup and how I would like to film these things. Please go ahead and like and subscribe. I can't wait to talk about film. So stay tuned and I will see you on the next one. Bye.